Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, Kassia and I spoke to Kiran Millwood Hargrave, who is a children's novelist and winner of both the Waterstones Children's Book of the Year Award and the British Book Award for children's category.
In stark contrast to the last episode when we were in a very fancy new office, this time we were in a artist studio at the bottom of Kiran's back garden, which was very good fun. She spoke to us very candidly about her finances and how she organises them with the very sort of irregular flow of money that writing gives you. She also spoke to us about the value of her writer's course, which she did, and that's how she began working on her novels. And she was also incredibly open about the difficulties she's had with her mental health and how writing has really helped her with those issues.
She was really great. I think Kassia as well, is genuinely quite inspiring to see her and the sort of creative life that she's built up in Oxford.
Yeah, writer's crush.
Yeah, exactly. And we really hope you enjoy this as much as we enjoyed our day trip to go and see her. Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. Kassia and I are here with Kiran Millwood Hargrave, the winner of the Waterstones Children's Book of the Year Award this year, and also the British Book Awards Children's Book of the Year, also for 2017. We're here in the studio at the end of her garden in Oxford, also with Kassia's dog Luna, who you may hear marauding in the background. And we're really excited to be talking to Kiran, who's someone we've wanted to have on the show for a while.
The first question we wanted to ask was, what is it that made you want to write?
It was probably reading. That's a very stereotypical answer, I know, but I sort of grew up as an avid reader and didn't start writing until about 5 years ago. And just one day sat down, wrote a poem, and it was as simple as that. I suddenly wanted to read as much contemporary poetry as possible, to write as much as possible. Within a year I had my first collection published, and it's sort of been non-stop from then.
And can you tell us a bit about the role that this creative writing masters played in your development as a novelist and so forth?
Yes, so I went onto the course in 2012, so I'd been writing for about 6 months before then, and the reason I chose Oxford in particular was that they make you focus on 3 disciplines. You do poetry, prose and drama. So whilst I was coming as a poet, I knew that I was also going to be challenged and going to be writing drama and fiction as well. Thank goodness, because I would never have made a living as a poet. So it's very good that they got you to write in all these different disciplines.
And how did the course actually work, like the mechanics of it and so forth? It was a 1-year programme, right?
It was 2 years part-time, and it's quite unique in that it's structured over a series of 4-day-long retreats. So what this did, first and foremost, was attract a really diverse international group of people. Because it was part-time, it was slightly cheaper, spread out over 2 years, and because it wasn't so time-intensive, it meant you got doctors coming, we had professors from Afghanistan, and it really enriched sort of the way, the types of writing we were exposed to, and was really exciting in that regard.
And you were saying just off air that it was very oversubscribed. What was the selection procedure for getting on that? Because you were saying you'd studied at Cambridge before.
Yes, I did my undergrad at Cambridge. I took a year and did a few different things trying to work out what I wanted to do, and then applied to this creative writing course. I applied to quite a few, and it was similar with all of them. You sent in an application with your degree and your writing sample in whatever discipline you're applying for. In terms of Oxford, they asked for writing in one discipline, even though they teach all 3. And then if you were successful getting past that first post, you had an interview. So I came up to Oxford for the interview, and then a couple of weeks later found out that I'd been successful.
And what's your view, you've obviously had this great success following this, on creative writing as a taught discipline in general? Obviously there's a debate and a conversation that goes on about that.
I think really it's each their own. What will work for one writer won't work for another. I always say when I go into schools and people ask me, do I need to go to university and do a creative writing course? The answer is absolutely not. The most important thing if you want to be a writer is to read as widely as possible, both within your genre and out of it. And I would say what a writing course does provide you with is a ready-made community. That's really the main benefit that I got from it. Also, obviously, Oxford in particular got me writing in a discipline I wouldn't have otherwise thought to write in fiction. So it's been invaluable in that sense. But really the main things are, it validates you as a writer. So it gives you permission to call yourself a writer. You learn a bit about how the industry works, and also it gives you that community.
Could you talk a bit about that community and that peer group? I was reading this piece about how you used to go to a pub in Oxford with people from your course, and they've now all had novels seen through to publication.
Yes, well, it's slight serendipity. We were around the same age, we shared similar reading and writing interests, and there were three of us, Sarah Hassin and Daisy Johnson and I used to write in the Rusty pub every afternoon. We all moved to Oxford, which gave us that time, and we were supported to sort of be writing across those 2 years. We all wrote our first novels in that pub. We all got agents the same year, and our first books all came out last year. So it's been really nice to do it with them.
Sure. And where within Oxford as well, I had experience studying here, so did Kassia. Not necessarily the most forward-looking institution always. How did the creative writing course kind of fit into the firmament of the university?
I think they sometimes felt slightly outside. Its immense popularity means that it has to be taken seriously. It's the most oversubscribed master's course in Oxford. And we did quite a lot to integrate within the community. I was president of the Oxford University Poetry Society, which is obviously a more mainstream sort of Oxford institution. And we did lots of open mics that kind of encouraged the wider student body in. I think any creative writing course is going to have a struggle being taken seriously, especially within such an academic setting, but hopefully the success of its alumni is kind of proving its worth.
I love what you say about giving yourself permission to call yourself a writer. I think that's such an interesting thing and something that so many people struggle with. But I think what's also one of the things we like to talk about on Always Take Notes are the practicalities. You mentioned getting an agent. Can you talk us through both your own experiences of getting an agent? Was it something that the course facilitated for you, or did that happen organically?
Don't do what I did. So I will share my experience first. So the first thing I did was I wrote 3 chapters of this children's book off the back of an assignment that we were set as part of one of our first year sort of courses. You had to write a page in a genre you'd never written in before, so I wrote a page about a girl running away. I thought, there's a story in this. I started writing it, wrote 3 chapters, and then sent it to an agent. Don't do that. You're meant to finish the novel first. The agent wrote back and said, I'd love to read the rest of it. I said, give me time to finesse it. I wrote it in about 3 months, which was very stressful. Wow. Sent it back. They said, this needs work, but we're willing to work with it on you. We're willing to work on it with you. And we sort of took it from there, developed a bit of a relationship. But after about 2 months of working on it, about 2 drafts, they still hadn't offered me representation. Now I know an agent will never work with you on your book unless they're going to offer you representation. They're very busy people, they're not going to waste their time. I didn't know that at the time, so I took my 3 chapters and my full novel at that stage, sent it out to a wider net of agents, and that's how I found my agent, Helly Ogden. So I didn't actually end up working with the agent, who is an excellent, very reputable agent, but I didn't actually end up working with them in the end. What you should do is finish your novel, put it in a drawer, give it another reread in a couple of months if you can wait that long, and then the Writer and Artist Yearbook is how I went about it. I followed their guidelines, worked and reworked my synopsis. Synopsis is very important for an agent. I've since learned all for my agent personally. And so go about it the right way, otherwise it's very stressful, which it already is, but it'll make your life a bit harder.
Did your peers have similar experiences, or did they kind of learn from your mistakes?
So a better case study would probably be Daisy Johnson, who I've already mentioned, and she wrote Fen, which is published by Jonathan Cape, just won the Edge Hill Award. And what she did was, a bit of her writing was excerpted in the pamphlet that the Oxford University sends out to a variety of agents before the showcase, and they actually contacted her off the back of that, and she worked with her agent to kind of finish her collection of short stories. So that's one of the other doors that doing a creative writing course can offer you. It is still unusual, and you can still go about it the traditional way. That's not an obstacle, that you don't have to do a creative writing course to get noticed.
Obviously, when you you had a slightly fraught beginning of relationship with your agent. Have you found the dynamics of working with the agent since then easier? It's quite an intense business but also personal relationship. How do you find it and how do you negotiate it?
Well, it is definitely a bit like a marriage, I think, and you're hoping to be in it as long as possible as well. With my agent, she's very young, very energetic, very hands-on editorially. As soon as I met her, I felt very comfortable, which I didn't necessarily feel as comfortable with the first agent I was working with, so it was useful to have that and to walk into the meeting with Helly and feel instantly, oh, this is someone I could talk to and be very honest with, and who I feel would be very honest with me. She's been very brutal about certain aspects of what I should be working on. She's got a perfect kind of mix of literary and commercial mindedness, which is very important to my writing. Whilst I want it to sort of treat it as art, I also want a career. I want to be making money. So that's been a very useful. I think it's useful to go in with ideas of what you want your career to look like.
Yeah.
If you're happy to have a full-time job and not be making a living off your writing, then you can sort of go for someone who is not so commercially minded. If you know that you want this to be your full-time job, you should go for someone who has commercial writers on their list. Looking at the list, I think, is very important.
Well, sort of on the commercial theme, how was it taking your book sort of out to the market and getting an actual publishing deal? What did that process look like for you?
For me, it was quite fraught again. So we did a couple of redrafts and we sent it out. Helly did a beautiful job of making the submission stand out. I think that's important to have that relationship with your agent where you can talk to them about how you want to be presented to a publisher, and it's not just signed of something they do. I wanted to know about my rejections as well as my acceptances. We sent out to 20 publishers initially. 18 rejected over a period of about 2 weeks, which was an intense
brutal
2 weeks. And I actually started writing my second book because I thought this isn't going to get a publisher. So I wrote my second book in those 2 weeks. And then I had 2 offers on the table, one of which was Chicken House. Had the meetings, met Barry Cunningham, who published J.K. Rowling, at the Savile Club, and was just completely wooed and completely trusted him. When he said, this book needs a lot of work, which it did. We halved it in the editorial process, but I think we can build a career for you, and they have.
I'm stunned that not only did you get a deal so quickly, but you also managed to sort of write the second book so quickly. That must have been an incredibly intense couple of weeks.
It was panic-driven, is probably the right word, and the first draft was terrible. The first draft of anything is often terrible. And that is one of the main things that no one tells you, is that it doesn't come out like a published book. It never will, first draft. So it was a very short first draft. It was about 40,000 words, but I was writing like someone possessed. I knew I wanted this now, and I had it within my grasp. And if this wasn't going to be the book, I was determined that this one, the new one that I was working on, was going to be the book.
And is it right that when you got a deal, it was actually a 2-book deal rather than a single book deal initially?
Yes, so I got a 2-book deal both in America. My American deal actually came through first because Janklow and Nesbitt they have a big office in New York, represent a lot of big writers. They're more boutique in London. So my offer from Knopf actually came through first, and I got a 2-book deal from them, and then the 2-book deal from Chicken House came through. So
Knopf is part of a big publishing company in the States, but Chicken House is an independent. Is that right?
They are associated with Scholastic. Scholastic do a lot of their distribution. Scholastic is the biggest children's book publisher in the States, and they're a bit dismayed when they found out I already had a publisher in the States, because they like to publish at the same time and so on. But they sort of have the distribution heft of Scholastic behind them, whilst having this very personal small team, about 7 people in a Georgian house in Somerset. It's a complete dream. And it's all very driven equally by Barry's vision and the other editorial director, Rachel Hickman. It's very design-led, very editorial-led. It's a really unique publisher. And
when you got this, when the deal came through, did you feel pressure from that? I mean, the classic sort of difficult second album syndrome, but I suppose you'd already written the second book, had you? How did that work?
I'd had second album syndrome with the third book, which is now into deep editorial. So I had a few false starts on that, but as you say, I'd already written the second book, so whilst I had to do a lot of rewriting, the story was there, the character was there, most of the hard work was done. And publishing works so far ahead of schedule. That book was already copy edited by the time Girl of Ink and Stars started having any measure of success, so it was nice to kind of not have that pressure. And actually Island at the End of Everything launched a week after Girl of Ink and Stars won the Bookseller Award, the British Book Award, so it was all sort of a very frantic couple of weeks, but that pressure didn't come in, which was nice.
When you won those awards, did you feel, there was an element of pressure or expectation that they brought as well? What was the emotional experience of winning the awards, or was it just sheer delight?
It was actually really pure delight, because I genuinely had no expectation of winning. With the Waterstones Award, the shortlist was incredibly strong. It was an incredibly strong year for middle grade, in particular last year. So I won the category award, sort of cried on stage, and then the overall award was announced, cried some more, and genuinely hadn't planned what I was going to say. Forgot to thank Waterstones, forgot to thank my agent. But I look back on that as a really joy-filled night, because I had no expectation, and I went in, I wasn't stressed. I just sort of was looking forward to meeting a lot of amazing authors, which I did. Met Nicola Yoon, who was over from the States for the ceremony and so on. So it was just a really joy-filled night. And then the Bookseller, the British Book Awards, I was on a shortlist with David Walliams and Tom Fletcher and J.K. Rowling, and I thought, well, this isn't going to happen. So just got very drunk with Chicken House, and then they announced my name. So that was equally fun, yes.
And I also saw that you've spoken or written very candidly about your mental health and how that's had an interface with your writing, which clearly I think very brave and very commendable to do that. Could you talk a bit about how those two factors of your life have interplayed?
Yes, so I was clinically depressed at Cambridge, and doing a degree and having to read, I couldn't read, and it wasn't ideal. So as soon as that started to lift, I started reading again as much as possible. It was something that I'd really missed, and that's when the writing started coming to kind of concurrently, and just having something to focus on and having that sense that you've achieved something. So one of my manifestations of my depression was that I spent a lot of time in bed. I just didn't I was in the semi-comatose state, but if I'd written a poem, I'd achieved something for the day. And it's just little building blocks, giving myself little goals to aspire to, and gradually realising I had a collection, which meant I had to get up and I had to find a publisher for that collection, and just sort of giving myself these little milestones and sort of increments to aim towards was really helpful. And I think one of the dangers of depression is it makes you feel like you're a waste of time, you're a waste of space, your life is a waste. And I could see that these words on a page, that was evidence I existed, that I'd created something, and I think that was very valuable to me. And I think it's very important to talk about it. Now I'm in a position, I feel strong enough to talk about it. Not that being depressed is weakness, but I feel that I can verbalise those experiences. I'm not in them anymore, and I think that's important, because a lot of people, especially creative people, struggle with anxiety, with depression, with lack of confidence. Not every day is easy, but I do think it's good to share and not feel alone in those experiences.
Well, I was just going to ask as a follow-up, do you see a connection between mental health issues and creativity? That's obviously another area that there's a discussion and debate about that one.
I do think there is, and there's probably very able articles and PhDs and so on made on those, but from my personal experiences, also being in the writing profession is maybe not the best thing for someone with anxiety. There's a lot of waiting, there's no measurable, you can win an award, but there'll still be people who hate your book. There's no it's all very subjective, and there's no, I actually was determined to have a very measurable career, as in of success, measurable success in my career. So I wanted to be a lawyer, and maybe go up through the ranks and to have those signifiers, and you just don't have that when you're a writer. So it's maybe not so useful. But I think the main thing that people who have mental illness and who have creativity share is enormous empathy. I think that emotion carries a real weight to it and is sometimes very hard to struggle under, but that's also what makes you a good writer.
Another thing that you would have as a lawyer, but don't have as a writer, is sort of that stable monthly paycheck.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how you work your finances and the messiness of of your kind of financial dealings as a writer?
Yes, so I am a naturally a spender. In times of plenty, I spend. In times of not plenty, I feed my cat and no one else. But that's not the best way to be a writer. As you say, it is a messy financial challenge, and so you get an advance. I'm sure most of your listeners will know how this works, but you get an advance when you sign a contract. That kind of gets meted out to you in thirds. Once when you sign, and then when you deliver your manuscript, then when it's published. So you've got that amount of money coming in, and it all starts to get a bit more complicated when royalties come in. So you have to pay off your advance with your royalties, which when you're working in 50p increments per book, can take a while, which is the general sort of standard measure. And then I personally, Chicken House pay me twice a year, and not pay me twice a year, once in April, once in September. I'm not sure if that's standard. So I'm coming up for my royalty check, ready with my ASOS basket. But I am having to grow up. I'm having to be less of a student about it. I've got a mortgage. I've got a husband who's an artist and is very good at saving. So I'm sort of, but neither of us have a stable income. We have a cat to support, and so it is important to be grown up about these things. And when you get this chunk of money at the beginning, not to be like, great, I'm rich, because that's going to have to last you across a 2-year period. In some cases, with my American money, it's still coming in 3 years, 4 years after I signed that deal. So it's a long process, but it's doable. I was very lucky in that Tom, my husband, was already a successful artist. He did give me some support. I also had savings from when I worked in that year that I took between Cambridge and Oxford. But that holds a lot of very talented writers back, that they just don't have the time is money, and you need time to write. And I was lucky to be writing full time whilst I was doing my Oxford course. So that was an enormous help, and one that I don't take for granted. It really is probably set me 2 years ahead of where I would have otherwise been.
I think probably you also have an advantage in that because you'd already done a lot of the work for getting your second book published, you weren't sort of under that pressure of earning out the advance on the first book, and the worry about getting the second book deal. Have you found that that's had effects for your third book, or have you managed to sort of ride it out and kind of got used to the cash flow and the biannual paychecks and all the rest of it?
Well, getting Waterstones support has, in blunt terms, made my financial situation stable, because I know they're buying in a certain amount of the book, they're selling a certain amount of the book. My sales have been very steady, apart from the peaks when it was Book of the Month, and then the peak when it won the Waterstones Children's Book Award. So there were sort of crazy months where it would sell more than it sells in sort of 2 months in a week. But otherwise, it's been a very stable. The children's book market is a very buoyant market. And now you've got 2 books. I've got 2 books out, so the more books you have out, the more royalties you have coming in, and it's just about building that momentum. So I signed another 2-book deal with Chicken House last year, and so I'm working my third at the moment. That's coming out in May next year. I've got my 4th coming out the year after that, so I'm just really trying to keep the momentum up, trying to get to a place where I could maybe have a couple of years to kind of get off the treadmill. But I'm under no illusion that I need to sort of store some of that creative credit, if you like, and kind of get ahead with those books in order to be able to have that time later.
It's so wonderful to hear you talk about it in terms of career and having that kind of that plan. How do you use that focus that you have for what you want your career to look like to sort of run your day-to-day life and your conversations, and not obsessively checking sales figures and all that kind of stuff? What does it look like?
I am very bad. I look at all my reviews, my Goodreads reviews, my Amazon reviews, and so you can easily spend a whole day falling into that hole. And I'm learning all the time. I've been doing this nearly 2 years now, and I'm improving my working practices now. My day is just taken up a lot more by the professional aspect of being a writer. Professional part of it is much more dull. It's admin and things like that. There's also school visits that are very much a part of a children's book writer's income, as well as your enjoyment. Actually meeting your readers is incredibly exciting and unique to being a children's writer in that way. Children are very interested in the work, and you, in a different way to adults, you never get a question that's sort of more about the questioner than you. They're always about the work, which I really enjoy. But it all takes away from writing, and so I do have my diary planned, into November next year, and sort of things. The more successful you get, the further in advance you are working, so that's kind of helpful in a way. So whilst you are getting booked up faster, you also know what your year looks like, and that's very helpful. So I can plan around that. Chicken House are great. They're the editorial lead. Knopf don't really do editorial with me, so Chicken House kind of take that lead, and they work around my schedule as well as making my schedule.
And in terms of events being kind of an extra revenue stream, is that something that you expected before the book was published? And have you had any help in sort of setting a day rate, and have you had pushback from schools sort of saying, well, maybe you could just come and talk for free?
Yes, and we all understand budgets are tight and getting tighter. We all understand that literacy is very important, and you feel you have a responsibility as a writer to kind of feed into that and to be encouraging of that and supportive. But also you have to, you're a professional and you have to be paid for your services. I aim to be flexible, but I do always expect to be paid something. And I'm a patron of reading for a great school in Abingdon, just down the road from me in Oxford. And it wasn't something that I expected to be such an important revenue stream as well as confidence stream when I came into this career. But it's really valuable to me as a writer, as well as I think to schools, sort of adding that content.
We've talked about how your children's novels fit into this commercial landscape, but you've continued with poetry and also with playwriting, perhaps don't have as obvious a commercial fit. Where do they fit into your creative practice, and do you see yourself carrying on with those other disciplines going forward?
So I've written one play, and that was produced in 2014 by director Max Barton. It was a wonderful experience. Playwriting is not something that comes naturally to me. I am a novelist and a poet first and foremost. That play, Boat, actually grew out of my third poetry collection, Splitfish, which was about my experiences of sexual assault and depression. And a director approached me and said, I'd like you to write a play about this. So we made it. He sort of dramaturged me into a playwright. I would like to try again, but it would have to be a very sort of collaborative process, because it's, as I say, not something that comes naturally to me. Poetry is my first love, and where I still feel very much at home when I do eventually get time to sit down and write. I've got a poetry collection coming out with Bloomsbury in collaboration with my husband Tom. He's done a graphic novel version of Orpheus's journey through the underworld, and I've done Eurydice's sort of answering back to her, to the silences that the myth kind of gives her. So I'm constantly looking for new ways to grow my poetry practice. I'm judging the Costa Poetry Book Award this year with Mona Arshi, which is an incredible honour and really has opened my eyes to poetry, because you have to be reading this stuff, and there's I read constantly, but you're still never going to really keep up, and it's been really nice to have that permission to come back to poetry in a meaningful way and really engage with it. And yeah, I'm all ready to start my next poetry project. I've got sort of a deadline in mind, a theme in mind, so I am going to start writing as soon as the edits are in for book 3.
I mean, I find it really interesting that I often think that what forms people do is a function of the age that they're in. So, if you were an ambitious writer in the early 19th century, you probably would be writing poetry, and there was money in it. But I find it interesting that you're continuing with that, even though the sort of the more lucrative work is elsewhere, right?
Yes, it is always about enjoyment as well, and what feeds you as a person. And I think that this is a vocation as well as a job. It's a calling in some ways. It's become more of a calling for me. As sort of I've got into it, I now can't imagine doing anything else. And I have to write to be happy. It's like a shark has to keep swimming. It's very important for my mental health as well. And so poetry is a very important part of the way I see the world, the way I process things, the way I explore narratives. And there are some narratives that are just more suited to poetry than they are to novels. So I am working on an adult book as well, but the character finds the form for me, and that's really how I see my poetry. It is character-led still, so I have a novelist's approach to it in that respect, but it is very much what that character needs from me in order to write it.
And also we're here at the moment in the studio at the end of your garden with your husband's wonderful paintings around us, and you mentioned this collaboration that you're doing with him. Do you see that your relationship is very much a collaborative, a creative as well as a romantic partnership?
Hugely. I wouldn't have started writing if I hadn't met Tom. We met in my first year at Cambridge, which was not what I wanted from my first year, to find my life partner. But he bought me that year's Ted Hughes shortlist. Was it T.S. Eliot Award shortlist? And it just inspired me, because I'd been reading T.S. Eliot, I'd been reading Auden, but I hadn't been reading contemporary poetry in a meaningful way. And it was an amazing year. It had Pascal Petit and Robin Robertson, who is one of my favourite poets now. And it just opened my eyes. So he then encouraged me in that. I saw he was making a living in that. He was relatively secure, which was very important to me as a recovering depressive. I wanted something relatively secure. Writing is not that, but he offered that security and that sort of strength and support that meant that I had the courage to sort of start writing my own stuff. I'm very good with rejection, which is a huge part of writing and poetry in particular, that is very oversubscribed, and there is no money. And so I really did start writing for the love and as a challenge to myself and to see if I had something to say.
I love what you said about letting the character find the form. But obviously, a lot of your two most successful novels so far have been for children. How is it that you allow your narrative to find an audience, or how do you know which audience you're going to be speaking to? And is that also influenced by the form?
So it's very revealing that my first novel, I didn't know who I was writing it for when I started writing. My main influences for it were The Firework Maker's Daughter by Philip Pullman, a lovely, neat, middle grade book, and 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Not a neat middle grade book, but sort of magical realism and adventure was my sort of brief that I gave myself. And then it just turned out that my main character was a 13-year-old girl. I wasn't particularly interested in writing sex. I wasn't particularly interested in writing swearing. It's quite a violent book. It's quite dark, which it's actually has turned some people off it. But I think kids love a bit of violence. And you only have to look at Roald Dahl. It's enduring appeal. And so it wasn't until I actually came to Chicken House. When I first submitted it to agents, I described it as a YA crossover magical realist adventure story. And the first thing Helly said when I went to meet us, we need to work on your pitch. And so we worked a little with her as to who it was for. We thought maybe skewing towards YA. Chicken House said this is the most perfect middle grade adventure. But I've seen in my readers that it goes from sort of precocious 8-year-olds up to adults. When it was Book of the Month and just being put on tills, adults were picking it up because the cover is very beautiful, and I think that has a lot to do with its appeal and got people into reading it. So the short answer was I didn't know who I was writing the first book for, and that caused me a lot of editorial headaches. The second book, I was very clear, this is a middle grade book. That's who the voice was. That's the girl was an 11-year-old girl. Her voice was very clear to me. Again, there was going to be no sex in the story, so it's a children's book, and that really is the difference to me. I'm now writing an adult book, and it's very much about obsession and sort of seduction, and so that is obviously more appropriate for adults than children. But I just see stories as stories, and I think that more adults should be reading children's books. I think that is happening with Frances Hardinge winning the Costa for the Lie Tree, and I think more adults are discovering the joys of children's books. But yeah, stories are stories, really.
I think that's something that both you have just said, and also I believe was said when you won the award, is the joy of storytelling that can be so clear in books for children, and sometimes there's a reaction against that in adult fiction. Is that something that you've struggled with when you're writing your book for adults?
So I do notice that I'm an avid reader of fiction for all ages, and I do notice that adult books don't tend to get to the point quite as quickly. So I'm actually trying to obfuscate my point is quite an interesting experience. And when I wrote the first 1,000 words and shared it with Saravat, Daisy and Tom, and sort of said, what do you think of this? And Daisy was like, well, you get to it very quickly. Like all your major players are on the page in the first 1,000 words, and that doesn't need to happen. And that's actually really nice to indulge a bit and to luxuriate in those finer details and that sort of minutiae of the setup. I love very lyrical writers like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, obviously, and John McGregor, and I do love sort of the more experimental, stylistic, poetic writing, and so I'm really revelling in bringing that into my adult book and not getting to the point so quickly.
A quick sort of explain this question. What does middle grade mean in terms of children's fiction?
So it's an American term, and some people in the UK hate it, but it's easy for authors to get their head around. It tends to be 8 to 12, 9 to 12, that kind of, when they're crossing from primary to secondary. They're not young children anymore, but they're not teenagers, so it tends to go sort of preschool and then middle grade, and then teen, and then YA, then new adult, and so on. But really, it's all marketing, it's all sales, it's all trying to get your book into the hands of the people who might enjoy it most. But there's an overemphasis on classification, and it does interfere with people's pleasure, I think, in finding the stories that truly speak to them. I read Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I'm talking about him a lot because he's my favourite. I read him when I was 14, didn't get most of it, but loved the sort of lushness of the language, and have reread 100 Years Solitude multiple times since and got something new each time. So, I think that it's important not to let classification get in the way of getting stories into readers' hands.
And could you talk a bit about your routine actually with writing itself? You'd mentioned earlier, the challenges of doing the admin and fitting that round, but actually, in terms of your creative routine, times of days, methods of writing, how do you work that one?
So one of my favourite poets, Lucy Brock-Broido, says that there are two types of writers. There are oxen and there are cats, and the oxen get up, they plough the field 9 to 5. Cats sleep most of the time, and then they sort of attack the work, and that is who I am. And that's very well facilitated by having deadlines, by having contracts that I can work to. Some weeks I won't write a word. I'll be thinking, but I won't write a word. I'll be doing school visits. I'll be seeing friends and family. I'm a very social person, and when I'm in the grip of a deadline, I don't see anyone. I lock myself in my office and allow myself to be obsessed, to be consumed by my book. And that is the way that I work. It's not the best way to work, I would argue. I think structure and routine is very important, and if you can work like that, that is the better way to work, because it's more predictable and you have that glow of achievement every day. I can't work like that. I need a deadline. I need to be slightly up against it. I don't believe in inspiration sort of being this mythical thing, but I do believe in sort of letting ideas ferment, and thinking time is as important as writing time to me.
And we spoke just off air before we started recording about this division in novelists between those who plot or kind of work the shape of the whole thing beforehand. I've read that William Boyd takes that approach, and those who just kind of jump in and get going. Ian Rankin was the one mentioned in the piece I was talking about. Which of those two poles do you tend towards?
I'm a complete pantser, so they call them plotters or pantsers. I have sort of a mission statement, if you like, an emotional heart, that I want to sort of address or tackle in my book. I know my characters because I've been thinking about them, I've been talking to them in my head, but I don't actually sit down and write a plan at all. I hate doing synopses ahead of the book actually being finished, which is a necessity, and often my synopses that I deliver to my publisher will then be completely different when I actually get the book to them. But I completely just follow my characters, trust my characters. It's not easy, it's the best way of working actually for the kinds of book I write, because their journey, their quest narratives, they're going from one place to another, and they're sometimes coming back, sometimes not. And so that's quite a good way of working, because you're discovering with your character, you're sort of mapping the territory that they're covering. With my adult book, it's a lot more stationary. We're kind of moving around one place. So I am writing myself a synopsis for that, just to kind of get my head around the kind of those finer details that are happening. So
do you type or do you write longhand?
I type. I hold my pen very strangely, and I actually, when I was doing my 11+, I had to wear a neck brace to keep my shoulder down, which was humiliating. To keep my shoulder down, because it sort of rises if I hold a pen for too long. And even when I'm signing books, sort of my hand and my shoulder ache for hours afterwards. So I love my laptop. It goes everywhere.
And this is going back actually to something we spoke about earlier, which has come across my mind. You've obviously had this huge success coming out of the creative writing course. And other people, other your peers, always have as well. I mean, I suppose thinking that Gore Vidal quote or is it Gore Vidal? Envy is the writer's sin. Have you experienced that from other people? Or
I think it's one of my greatest attributes. I don't have many. Is that I do not get jealous of what other people have. I am jealous of people's talent, but also hugely glad they have it, because it means I can read it. I derive far more pleasure from reading my friends' books than I do envy, and that's really stood me in good stead, because jealousy can be such a corrosive emotion and so detrimental to creativity when you've got that voice in your head saying, oh, look what they've got, look what they did. I really try to just keep my eye on the ball and to use my own work as the measure against which I measure my work going forward, because I can't write like anyone else, no matter how much I might want to, so I might as well not want to. And yeah, I genuinely do not get envious. I derive a great deal of joy from other people's successes, and that's a really useful trait, I think.
We were speaking, perhaps rather ungenerously, on the bus on the way up about how crowded the children's book scene has become with celebrities and sort of big names. Has that affected you, and do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, Walliams just is the chart. Yesterday I was at the children's conference, bookseller children's conference, and they did the top 5, and it was all Walliams. And that's just I personally think his books are great, and they're getting kids reading, and I think that that's very positive. I think when the books aren't great, it can be quite galling. But I don't think they are getting book deals and shelf space other than from retailers where you buy the shelf space. They're not getting that above good writers, and if the book's not good, kids aren't going to enjoy it. They're not going to tell their parents to go and buy another one. So, and a lot of these celebrity writers, they're quite good writers. They're maybe not the best writers in the world, but they are telling good stories. Obviously, it would be great if a few more people got opportunities, but I don't think people are missing out on opportunities because of celebrity writers. I think they're very different markets. No one expects to sell like Walliams. That's just not, we kind of, yesterday they said, if we cut Walliams out, and that's how publishers actually measure success. My original sales target was 5,000 for the first period for Chicken House. So, they don't have that expectation that you need to be selling hundreds of thousands.
That makes your job easier in some ways. You're just never going to
quite. Yes, you just kind of discount it.
Of the children's fiction world.
Exactly, and Dave Walliams, Tom Fletcher. There are some great celebrity children's authors and people who are great advocates for children's literature as well. So I I suppose it's easy because my book has had that commercial success, so maybe I'm slightly kinder about it and don't have such a, like, I don't have a chip on my shoulder about it, but I don't sort of poo-pah people who do. Like, they have their own reasons, but that's my personal take on it.
We hope you enjoyed that. Now, a quick update from our lives. Simon, what have you been up to?
I'm still reeling from Cassia's criticism of my personal organisation tactics in the last episode.
He's now got a whiteboard.
Yeah.
I'm outing him as having a whiteboard.
Yeah, I'd like to just come clean about being a whiteboard owner. That's transformed my life. This week I've been...
Tragic. We're not cutting this. This is staying in. Carry on.
I've been smarting this week from Cassia's constant criticism and endless microaggressions. I've been starting the fact-checking process on my book, which has involved experimenting with Scrivener, the special for writers word processor, and obviously a lot of whiteboard time as well. Kassia, what about you?
I was really surprised that you're working with Scrivener. I tried it and failed miserably, but I'll be really interested to see how you get on with it. You have to let me know. What have I been doing? I've mostly been panic writing a chapter of my book. I hope the publishers and my agent aren't listening to this.
Don't worry, this goes out post deadline.
So I've been panic writing a chapter, and I think one of the reasons why it took me so long to get to it was because the subject matter is quite dark and depressing. Anyway, enough about that. This has been Always Take Notes, hosted by me, Kassia St. Clair.
And me, Simon Acomb.
Our producers are Olivia Cralin, Ed Kiernan and Liz Davies.
We have music by Jess Danheiser. Zara Hankier handles our social media, and our graphic design is by James Edgar.
We're on all manner of social media. You can find us on Facebook and on Instagram. Just search Always Take Notes. Our Twitter handle is Take Notes Always, and our website is alwaystakennotes.com.
And if you've enjoyed the show, please do leave a review on iTunes.